On a spring morning in Cape Town, 21-year-old Princess Elizabeth stood before a microphone and made a promise that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She didn't know that in just 5 years, her father would be dead. She didn't know that the carefree existence she was clinging to was already slipping through her fingers. And she certainly didn't know that the diamonds being placed around her neck that very evening would become symbols of a sacrifice so profound, most of us can barely comprehend it. This is the story of Elizabeth's last years of freedom. The years between victory and duty, between girlhood and crown, between the woman she might have been and the queen she was forced to become. And threaded through every moment of this bittersweet chapter are the jewels, each one marking a threshold she crossed, a dream she surrendered, a piece of herself she locked away forever. When we left Elizabeth in 1945, she was an 18-year-old princess who had just tasted independence for the first time, driving ambulances and getting her hands dirty with the Women's Auxiliary Territorial Service. The war was over, and for one brief shining moment, it seemed like she might have a chance at something resembling a normal life. Her uncle David's abdication had thrust her father onto the throne, yes, but she was still the heir presumptive, not the heir apparent. There was always the possibility that her parents might have a son. There was always the chance that fate might take a different turn. For 7 years, from 1945 to 1952, Elizabeth lived in that strange twilight between two worlds. She fell in love, she married, she became a mother. She even got to play house in Malta, shopping at local markets and hosting dinner parties like any other naval officer's wife. But all the while the weight was building, the vow was made, the jewels were accumulating. And with each diamond that touched her skin, each pearl that circled her throat, she was being transformed from a young woman with dreams into a living symbol of continuity and duty. Today we're going to walk through those 7 precious years, and we're going to see how the jewels she received during this time tell a story that's rarely acknowledged. The story of everything Elizabeth gave up before she ever wore the crown. The vow. Let's begin where it truly started, not with a tiara, but with a microphone and a promise that would define everything that followed. It's April 21st, 1947. Elizabeth is in South Africa with her family, and it's her 21st birthday. The nation has declared it a holiday. She reviews 7,000 troops at a military base. She attends a rally of South African youth. But the moment that matters happens in the evening when she sits down to record a radio broadcast that will be transmitted to the entire Commonwealth. The speech wasn't written by Elizabeth herself. It was penned by Dermot Morra, a distinguished journalist from The Times, at her father's request. But here's what most people don't know. During the rehearsal, Elizabeth wept. According to Alan Lascelles, the King's private secretary who was present, the words moved her so deeply that she couldn't get through them without tears. When the broadcast finally aired at 6:55 p.m. on BBC Home Service, millions heard a composed young woman declare,
"I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong."
The simplicity of those words masks their weight. This wasn't a ceremonial pledge. This was a 21-year-old woman binding herself to a path from which there would be no escape, no retirement, no possibility of choosing differently if the burden became too heavy. That same evening, at a glittering ball at Government House in Cape Town, Field Marshal Jan Smuts presented Elizabeth with a gift from the South African government. A diamond necklace of 21 stones, one for each year of her age. The largest stone weighed 10 carats. It was exquisite. It was also a collar, a beautiful glittering collar that symbolized exactly what she had just promised to accept. Elizabeth treasured this necklace for her entire life. In later years, she had it modified, shortened from 21 stones to 15, with the remaining diamonds repurposed into a matching bracelet. but she never forgot what it represented. The moment she stopped belonging to herself and became the property of history. The tears during that rehearsal tell us everything. Elizabeth understood what she was promising, and she made the promise anyway. Love in the ruins. But here's what makes this story so achingly human. Just 8 months after that solemn vow, Elizabeth did something that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with desire. She fell in love. Or rather, she acknowledged a love that had been quietly growing for years. Philip Mountbatten, formerly Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark, had been in her orbit since 1939, when she was just 13 and he was a dashing young officer training at Dartmouth Naval College. They'd corresponded during the war. By 1946, when he proposed, their attachment had deepened into genuine love. The king consented to the match, but with one important condition. The formal engagement announcement had to wait until after Elizabeth's 21st birthday. It was a gift of adolescence, a few more months of being young before the machinery of state took over completely. When the engagement was finally announced in July 1947, Philip faced a practical problem that many men in love have faced: how to provide a ring worthy of a future queen when your resources are modest. The solution came from his mother, Princess Alice of Battenberg. She offered Philip a tiara that had been her wedding gift in 1903 from Tsar Nicholas II and Tsarina Alexandra of Russia, the last Tsar and Tsarina, whose fate would end in tragedy just 14 years later. Philip took this Russian imperial tiara to the London jeweller Philip Antrobus Limited, where craftsmen dismantled it and repurposed its diamonds. At the center of the new engagement ring, they set a stunning 3-carat round diamond flanked by 5 smaller pavé diamonds on each side, all set in platinum. The design was modern, elegant, understated. When Philip presented the ring to Elizabeth, he gave her not just a jewel, but a genealogical statement. These diamonds had once graced the tiara of a Russian empress. They had survived revolution, exile, war, and the fall of dynasties. Now they circled the finger of the woman who would become queen of the world's last great surviving empire. From the remaining stones of his mother's tiara, Philip commissioned one more piece, a diamond bracelet that would become one of Elizabeth's most beloved possessions. Known as the Edinburgh Wedding Bracelet, it featured a modern geometric design with 3 large square diamond links connected by vertical sections, all set in platinum. Elizabeth received this bracelet as Philip's personal wedding gift. From the moment she fastened it around her wrist, it became a cherished object, worn regularly throughout their 73-year marriage. Years later, in 2012, when she sat for her Diamond Jubilee portrait, the same bracelet adorned her wrist, 70 years after her wedding day, a continuous emblem of the love that sustained her. The broken tiara. The wedding itself on November 20th, 1947, should have been perfect. And in many ways it was, a moment of national celebration in a Britain still recovering from war. But the morning of the ceremony unfolded as a masterclass in grace under pressure, and it gave us one of the most beloved anecdotes of Elizabeth's life. Elizabeth had chosen to wear, as her something borrowed, the Queen Mary fringe tiara, a magnificent piece that had belonged to her grandmother but was now lent to her by her mother. Made in 1919 for Queen Mary by Garrard, it incorporated 633 brilliants and 271 rose diamonds, over 900 gemstones in total, arranged in 47 tapering bars. Today, it's estimated to be worth approximately £6.7 million. As Elizabeth was being dressed at Buckingham Palace that morning, disaster struck. The metal frame of the tiara snapped. just hours before she was to walk down the aisle of Westminster Abbey before 2,000 guests and be heard by 200 million people worldwide on radio, her something borrowed had literally broken in two. Years later, when recounting the incident to Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, Elizabeth recalled her alarm. "The tiara snapped. I thought I'd broken it." But the Queen Mother remained calm. They had time, 2 hours before Elizabeth needed to leave for Westminster Abbey. And as it happened, there was a Garrard jeweller standing by in the palace, prepared for exactly such emergencies. A police escort was immediately arranged, and the damaged tiara was rushed through London's traffic to the Garrard workshop. The master jeweller worked with speed and precision. Later, Elizabeth would recall with characteristic understatement, "I think they taped up the spring." The tiara was rushed back to Buckingham Palace and carefully secured to Elizabeth's veil. By 11:30 a.m., the future Queen was walking down the aisle wearing the repaired tiara. If you look closely at the official wedding photographs, you can see that the tiara sits very slightly askew on Elizabeth's head. This small imperfection is the physical trace of the morning's crisis, visible to all who know where to look. Pearls and centuries. But the tiara drama, as captivating as it is, wasn't the only treasure Elizabeth wore that day. Around her neck were 2 pearl necklaces that carried within them the accumulated history of the crown: the Queen Anne necklace and the Queen Caroline necklace. These weren't glittering modern pieces, but ancient heirlooms, centuries old. The Queen Anne necklace, composed of 46 natural pearls, was believed to have belonged to Queen Anne, the last Stuart monarch, who ruled from 1702 to 1714. The Queen Caroline necklace, with 50 pearls, was thought to have belonged to Queen Caroline, consort of King George II. Both necklaces had been owned by Queen Victoria, and both had been treasured by the royal family as sacred objects, not mere jewellery, but tangible connections to the women who had worn the crown. On the morning of the wedding, these priceless heirlooms were discovered to be still on display at St. James's Palace, where they had been arranged with the other wedding gifts. There was no time to retrieve them through normal channels. A royal secretary performed an act of desperate devotion. He sprinted through London's congested streets, arriving at Buckingham Palace just in time for Elizabeth to clasp the ancient pearls around her neck before departing for Westminster Abbey. As Elizabeth walked down the aisle in her gown stitched with more than 10,000 pearls, paid for, poignantly, with ration coupons like any ordinary bride in austere post-war Britain, she carried upon her the accumulated treasury of the crown, not merely as ornament, but as the physical embodiment of the dynasty she was marrying into. Malta and motherhood. If the wedding represented the public apotheosis of Elizabeth's transition to adulthood, the years that followed revealed another dimension of her character, a capacity for ordinary happiness and a relish for a life beyond ceremonial constraints. Philip, as a serving naval officer, was posted to Malta as a squadron commander. Between 1949 and 1951, the royal couple lived at Villa Guardamangia, a substantial townhouse in Pietà, just outside Valletta. It was, remarkably, the only house outside the United Kingdom that Elizabeth would ever call home. The 3 years at Malta would remain among the happiest of Elizabeth's life. In 2015, on a visit to Malta, she told the assembled Maltese that she cherished memories of happy days here with Prince Philip when we were first married. What made these years remarkable was their ordinariness. Elizabeth shopped at local grocers like other naval wives. She drove a Morris Minor around the winding streets of Valletta. She held dinner parties and picnics with other officers' wives. She visited the local hairdresser. A neighbour, Giuseppe Formosa, recalled seeing her regularly in those years, noting that she was much loved here. People used to wait to wave to her. She would respond back, waving her hand. But the ordinariness was punctuated by the extraordinary. On November 14th, 1948, while still living in England before the Malta posting, Elizabeth gave birth to a son, Charles Philip Arthur George, who became second in line to the throne. When the infant prince was born, Elizabeth's parents marked the occasion by presenting their daughter with a remarkable brooch. The flower basket brooch, a multicolored piece depicting a delicate basket filled with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and other precious stones arranged to suggest flowers in full bloom. The brooch was a gift celebrating motherhood, the arrival of the heir, and Elizabeth's new role as the mother of the next generation of the monarchy. Elizabeth treasured it and wore it prominently, including in Charles's first official portrait. During these early years of married life and motherhood, Elizabeth also developed what would become her most iconic sartorial trademark, the three-strand pearl necklace. King George VI had given her pearls each year for her birthday, beginning when she was a young girl. By the time she reached 18, she had accumulated enough to be strung into an impressive three-strand necklace. The necklace was more than jewelry to Elizabeth. It was a tangible manifestation of her father's affection. The pearls he gave her each year were tokens of that love, and when Elizabeth wore them in a triple strand, she was wearing her father's devotion year by year, accumulated across her adolescence. The end of freedom. The ordered life that Elizabeth and Philip had constructed, the happy years in Malta, the growing family, the balance between duty and domesticity, came to an abrupt end on the morning of February 6, 1952. King George VI died unexpectedly in his sleep at Sandringham House in Norfolk. He was just 56 years old. Elizabeth and Philip were in Kenya at the beginning of their Commonwealth tour. They were staying at Sagana Lodge, a property given to them as a wedding gift by the Kenyan government. On the evening of February 5th, Elizabeth had spent happy hours at the nearby Treetops Hotel, watching elephants and other wildlife, unaware that her father was dying thousands of miles away. The news reached Nairobi in the early morning. Philip eventually informed her, and the couple took a walk in the grounds of Sagana Lodge, an emotional moment that would not be captured in photographs, but which marked the instant in which Elizabeth's life changed irrevocably. At 25 years old, Elizabeth was now Queen. Not a queen regnant in waiting, but the reigning sovereign of 7 independent Commonwealth nations. On February 8, 1952, at St. James's Palace in London, the 25-year-old Queen made her formal accession declaration before her Privy Council. Her words were simple and moving. "By the sudden death of my dear father, I am called to assume the duties and responsibility of sovereignty." Among her very first acts as Queen was to put on the three-strand pearl necklace that her father had given her, the necklace of natural pearls accumulated year by year, beginning in childhood. In wearing these pearls at this moment of grief and transition, Elizabeth was wrapping herself in her father's love, seeking comfort and strength from the only piece of him that she could now physically possess. As Queen, Elizabeth inherited not merely a throne, but an immense collection of crown jewels that represented centuries of accumulated wealth and history. Among the treasures that came to her through her grandmother Queen Mary's estate were 2 diamonds that would become some of her most beloved possessions, the Cullinan III and the Cullinan IV. These were among the largest of the diamonds cut from the 3,106-carat Cullinan rough diamond discovered in South Africa in 1905. The Cullinan III is a pear-shaped stone weighing 94.4 carats. The Cullinan IV is a square cushion cut weighing 63.6 carats. Together, they weigh 158 carats. Queen Mary had loved these diamonds passionately, often wearing them hooked together as a pendant brooch. When she died in March 1953, these beloved diamonds passed to Elizabeth, and in a moment of family intimacy, Elizabeth revealed that these enormous, spectacularly valuable stones had a secret family nickname, Granny's Chips. The name is endearing in its casualness, a hint of the humour and warmth that existed within the royal family despite all the ceremonial formality. The coronation. 16 months elapsed between Elizabeth's accession and her coronation, a period of intense preparation for what would become one of the most historically significant coronations in British history. The coronation was scheduled for June 2, 1953. The date was chosen strategically, and the event would be unprecedented in one crucial respect. It would be televised, allowing ordinary people in their homes to witness the moment when their queen was crowned. On the morning of June 2nd, Elizabeth left Buckingham Palace in the Gold State coach. As it processed through the streets of London, it was greeted by crowds estimated at 3 million strong. The Queen wore, for this procession, the George IV state diadem, a glittering diamond tiara made in 1820 for King George IV, set with 1,333 diamonds weighing a total of 320 carats. The design incorporates the national symbols of the kingdom: English roses, Scottish thistles, Irish shamrocks, and Welsh daffodils. The ceremony that followed lasted approximately 3 hours. The Archbishop of Canterbury anointed Elizabeth with holy oil, marking her as chosen by God for her role. She was invested with the symbols of her authority: the orb, the scepters, the ring. Then came the moment the entire ceremony had been building toward: the placing of St. Edward's crown upon her head. As the Archbishop placed the crown, the assembled people rose and shouted, "God save the Queen!" Trumpets sounded. The great guns at the Tower of London fired a 21-gun salute. Those who witnessed the moment reported being moved by Elizabeth's composure, by her grace, by what one observer described as a radiant smile as she was invested with the crown. Following the coronation, Elizabeth exchanged St. Edward's crown for the imperial state crown, which she would wear for the remainder of the day. This crown contains some of the most important and historic diamonds in the world, including the Cullinan II diamond, a 317-carat stone cut from the great Cullinan diamond. Around her neck, Elizabeth wore the coronation necklace created for Queen Victoria in 1858 by Garrard. It consists of 26 diamonds, including the Lahore diamond, a 22.48-carat stone that was part of the Lahore treasure discovered in 1849. As Elizabeth processed out of Westminster Abbey, she was transformed. No longer the young woman who had entered that morning, but the formally crowned and anointed queen, bearing the weight of empire on her shoulders. Looking back at the 7 years between 1945 and 1952, what emerges isn't a story of a woman preparing for greatness. It's the story of a woman learning to surrender everything personal for something larger than herself. The jewels that marked each moment along this journey weren't just beautiful objects, they were witnesses. The South African diamonds saw her make a vow she couldn't break. Philip's engagement ring and bracelet held the promise that love might sustain her through what was coming. The broken tiara taught her that even disasters could be overcome with grace. Her father's pearls became her armor in grief, and the coronation jewels transformed her from Elizabeth into Elizabeth Regina. What strikes me most, revisiting these years, is how much she gave up before she ever had the chance to discover who she might have been. Those 3 years in Malta, shopping at markets, hosting dinner parties, being ordinary, were the only taste of normal life she would ever have. The woman who was crowned on June 2, 1953, was 27 years old. She would wear the crown for 70 more years, longer than any British monarch in history. But she would never again be free. Which of these jewels speaks to you most deeply? Is it the South African diamonds that witnessed her vow? Philip's engagement ring that held the promise of love? Or perhaps her father's pearls that became her comfort in grief? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey through Elizabeth's last years of freedom moved you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. We'll continue following her story in next episodes, exploring how the jewels she wore reflected the woman she became and the sacrifices she made along the way. Thank you for watching.